Let's get this corned beef and cabbage out onto a plate. Nice!
What up, YouTube? This video is taken on this Friday afternoon, March 17th, 2023. Time right now is 7:54 p.m. and it's St. Patrick's Day. As you can see, I had some corned beef and cabbage today. Publix and Winn-Dixie both had it on sale for $4.99 a pound. I've been doing a lot of my shopping at Winn-Dixie lately because ease of accessibility, and Winn-Dixie's never crowded. So while I was there, I went ahead and picked up the corned beef. The whole dinner, corned beef. They had, what was it, Russell potatoes on sale? A bag of russet? I don't know. The brown potatoes. They had them on sale. So I bought a bag of that. The cabbage, corn, and onion. And, I already had some cloves of garlic here. But the meal ended up costing me $26. And I don't know how many meals I'll get from it. At least 4, I would say. It was like a 3.5 pound of corned beef slab. I did it in the crock pot. I didn't realize that. You see, I must be having a false memory or something. I thought corned beef and cabbage was always done in the crock pot. But when I was Googling recipes, and I think when I've done it in the past before, I did it in the crock pot. But when I was Googling recipes, most of them had you do it on the stove. But I wanted the ease of doing it on the crock pot, and it didn't turn out too well. As far as the corned beef didn't seem like it tenderized that well. So maybe in hindsight, I should have done it on the stove. But I wanted something that I could set and forget, and that's what I did. So I had it on high in the crock pot for 6.5 hours. I checked it at 6, and then I waited 30 more minutes, and then finally I was too hungry to eat. So it tasted good, just the texture wasn't what I was expecting. But it'll make for good leftovers. What I wanted to flap about today was the battle I've been having with my sprinkler system. I'm finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't want to speak too soon, but I really have learned a lot of lessons the hard way with the sprinkler system. And originally, I was gonna like document this whole process, and I filmed a lot of video, but it unraveled very fast, and I decided not to even post the video because it turned out I didn't know what I was doing. So I have a lot of B-roll of me working on the sprinkler system, which I'm overlaying on this flap. I'm trying a new thing where I'm just recording audio to save, all the file size of recording videos. So I'm just gonna overlay like B-roll, I guessing say over this. But basically, I've lived in this house for 6 years, and the sprinkler system was pre-installed before the previous owner did it. And there's a lot of weird things with the sprinkler system that makes me wonder if a professional did it or if the previous owner did it. I don't know what. There was a lot of the equipment that was chosen kind of makes me. The equipment that was chosen as far as the pump and the valves makes me think that a professional did it. But at the same time, there's a lot of weird stuff going on that makes me think maybe the previous owner did it. Another thing is, since I lived in this house, I've noticed, and also talking to my neighbors, they mentioned that the previous owner, he was on a fixed income and he was a little on the cheap side. And I kind of noticed that with some of the ways he did things, or some of the stuff that he selected, like countertops for my kitchen, for example, or the cheapest countertops you can get. So I have a hard time believing that he put in the sprinkler system because he chose some expensive equipment for the sprinkler system. But and he didn't really. He showed me where the controller was, and he showed me where the valves were, and obviously the pump You know, you can see where the pump is, but he never really walked through the sprinkler system. So I kind of just let the sprinkler system be. And the most I ever messed with it in the past was I would break off heads, the pop-up heads. So I would go out to Lowe's, buy a replacement head, put it in. And I did attempt in the past to rebuild the valves because the valves weren't cycling right. But this whole entire time, I could never get the valves to really cycle good. Like zone 1 seemed like it was always stuck on. So that was my extent. That was the extensiveness of my sprinkler knowledge of this house. I kind of just let it kind of fall to the wayside. And if you look at photos of my house when I bought it, when it was listed, the yard was immaculate. And then now I kind of lost control over it. But last summer, the sprinkler system totally stopped working. I wasn't getting any pressure out of the pump. And who knows how long it was running like that before I figured it out. So I ended up turning it off. Now, I'm going to tell this story with all my hindsight 2020 in mind. And I know I made a lot of really stupid mistakes. You know, you can't go back in time. I wish I could go back in time and just think about things more logically before I jumped in there. But pretty much I could not get water coming out of the pump. So for those of you who don't know, I live on a canal. So my sprinkler system has a irrigation pump, 2 horsepower irrigation pump that pumps the water out of the canal. It's a 2-inch pickup line. And at that time, last summer, when I wasn't getting any water pumping through it, at that time last summer when I wasn't getting any water pumped through it, the lake level dropped unusually low. My whole seawall from end to end was exposed, which that's the first time since I lived here that the lake was that low. I didn't realize it at the time because I didn't know anything about, irrigation pumps and how they're set up. I know a lot more stuff now, but I didn't realize it at the time. But you have a check valve so you don't lose the prime, and I didn't realize that. The check valve is located it was buried in the ground on the land side right next to my seawall. So the check valve was actually above water. So in hindsight, the problem probably was that the canal went so low that on the other side of that check valve there was air and it lost its prime. And at that time I didn't know anything about the prime hole on top of the pump. So I did all this troubleshooting, and like I said, I didn't even know that there was a check valve there. I thought the line was clogged because I couldn't, when I unhooked it from the pump, I could tell it was clogged, but really what it was I was fighting against the check valve. So when I couldn't get the line unclogged, what I decided to do was I was fighting the check valve, didn't realize it, but I had no idea what the pickup was in the canal. Like I'd never seen it before. And it was all one solid pipe. So I cut the pipe at the seawall, which at the time was above water, and I pulled the whole pickup out of the canal. And what it ended up being the feeder line goes to a T, and there's 2 long perforated tubes that is your pickup line. This thing is like 10 feet, maybe 12 feet long. So that wasn't clogged at all. And where I had the pipe cut, it was above water at that time. So when I tried to check it from the wall back up to the pump, instantly, like as soon as I got past the wall, I hit something. And when I dug it up, it was a check valve. And then I realized, it was a check valve. That's why I couldn't, clear the line. So what ended up happening, what I decided was, I was like, okay, I'll put in a Soviet Union there at the wall. because in the future I could unhook the pickup line. And I kind of diddy daddled a little bit, and I ended up waiting too long, and we had a big storm, and the end of the pipe went underwater because the canal rose. So I was like, oh great, I have no way to connect this pipe back up. I can't glue it anymore. Can't glue anything to it because it's underwater. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention at this time I already jumped the gun and I bought a brand new pump, which I didn't even realize that you can get rebuild kits for the pumps. I should have done that instead, but I wasn't thinking. So I bought a brand new pump, and I was doing all this because that brand new pump wasn't working, or so I thought. So what I ended up doing was digging up the check valve under the wall, and of course that went underwater as well. As soon as you hit the water, the water table, it goes underwater, and a lot of sand gets mixed in. And someone told me that you can glue PVC pipe underwater. So I got the real fancy PVC glue that said it was for wet conditions. Tried to glue it. The glue, it did not stick. The glue did not stick. So what I ended up doing was I ended up just, and I was kind of, my tolerance level was, I was done. And keep in mind, this is like in July, so it was extremely hot. So I ended up gluing a Soviet Union and like a 2 foot piece of pipe. This is all 2 inch with a coupler on the end glued to this 2 foot piece of pipe, and I ended up shoving it through the seawall and onto the 2 inch line that was underwater. And I just buried it. I didn't glue it at all. I just buried it. And then I attached the Soviet Union to the previous feeder line, and I put a check valve on that part of it. And my theory was, in the future, I can always try, when I take off the Soviet, I know the check valve is on the Soviet side, and then I would have a clear line going to the pump. So I put it all back together, and I'm still having trouble pumping, but then I realized that what I was doing was I was filling up on the pump, what I was doing was on the pump, the prime hole, I was filling up with water and then closing it up. I ended up finding out what you really need to do is you really need to fill it up with water, leave it open, and let the pump shoot water out of the prime hole, and then close it up, and then you get a good prime. So I did all that, got it primed, and even though that coupler wasn't connected, it wasn't glued, it was connected, the pump never lost its prime. It was holding water. So I was like, oh, this is great. So, and at this time I had no pressure gauge. I noticed my pressure was a little lower, but the irrigation system was kind of working. So I ran it that way. Well, sure enough, it didn't last like a month. I realized that it was like trickling out water out of the heads. So I shut it off, and I was like, I'm just going to give up and wait till next year when it's cooler, and I'll tackle it. So winter comes, January comes, and I told myself, okay, in February, I'm going to tackle this. And I didn't even mow my grass for like 2 months, and I had weeds. So I mowed the grass, and last month, February, I decided I'm going to tackle this sprinkler problem. So first thing I did was I dug up that coupler in the ground, which now the water level is a lot higher. But as soon as I dug up that coupler, I realized that, lo and behold, it came apart. So it's still underwater. And what I ended up doing was I got a rubber coupler from Lowe's with 2 clamps on each side. And I was like, okay, I'll put this on to keep, so I can do this underwater. And I happen to have an 1.5 inch pipe laying around. So the way I did this was I took off the Soviet Union. I was able to shove an 1.5 inch pipe through the Soviet Union, and I was able to shove it through the coupler, even though it's decoupled. I was able to shove enough through the coupler that it went on both sides. So then, oh yeah, because this is extremely hard working in this hole because it's under the water table and the sand just keeps on. You dig up sand, the sand just piles in. When you're under the water table, it just fills up with sand. And I was afraid I was going to lose the end of the pipe if I took it apart completely. So I had this 1.5 inch pipe shoved through there, and with that, I was able to take the coupler off and the Soviet Union off, put the rubber coupler on, put it on, tighten it down, put it all back together, and the pump was working, and the pump kept its prime. But I bought a pressure gauge and realized that I wasn't getting enough pressure. So I fiddled around with it, and then I decided, you know what, I probably burnt up that pump since I had that coupler open. So I'm going to buy a rebuild kit. So I bought a rebuild kit for the pump. When I went to rebuild the pump, there was all this stuff in the impeller. So it was just picking up junk. So I rebuilt the pump, and when I rebuilt the pump, I got full pressure. I got a ton of pressure. And my biggest regret is I didn't have a pressure gauge to begin with. So I didn't know what my target pressure was. I didn't know any of this information. And when I was getting like 20 pounds of pressure when I checked it with the pressure gauge. Well, with 20 pounds of pressure, I was having problems with the valves. The valve company said that 20 pounds is a minimal, and they recommend 35 pounds of pressure for the valves to operate. So when I rebuilt the pump, which mainly probably the problem was all this stuff in the impeller, I got good pressure. I ended up ultimately getting 60 pounds of pressure, but I think maybe when I got good pressure, I was only getting like 40 pounds. But I was like, man, this is great. And then as soon as that happened, bam, the pump lost its prime. So then I dug up the coupler again because I already buried it back in the ground. When I dug it up again, sure enough, the rubber coupler came undone. Now this time, my neighbors were like noticing that I was always working on the sprinkler system. They were talking about it, and my neighbor Kenny and my other neighbor Mike across the canal, they helped me undo the coupler, push it back on, and as I'm pushing forward pressure on, my neighbor Kenny is tightening it, and this time I gave him a ratchet to tighten it with, and he got it really tight. So at this point, I leave it undug because I'm like, I'm going to leave it undug till, we get this straightened out. So prime the pump, everything's good. I have full pressure, and now the valves aren't cycling right. I can't get the valves to turn on and off. All this crazy stuff with the valves. If I got the valve to turn off, when it would turn on, it wouldn't turn back off. All this crazy stuff. So I bought brand new, the valve company said that the diaphragms can go bad. I bought brand new diaphragms, springs, anything I could replace on the valve, I replaced. Now, the thing about these valves is you can't get them at Lowe's. Their pipes are 1.5 inches. So that's what I was saying about, I don't know why the previous owner picked the system or sized the system. These valves, I have 4 zones, and they have 1.5 inch pipes going to them and leaving them. So I rebuild the valves. I'm still having all sorts of problems. I have plenty of pressure. I just have all sorts of problems. And I'm noticing that I'm getting a lot of sand in the valves. I would open up a valve. There would be sand in it. I would purge it, vacuum out with a shop vac, put it back together. Valve was sick, open it back up, sand again. And right when I was trying to like figure out why I'm getting all this sand. Oh yeah, so I was getting all this sand. So then I decide, well, I need a filter. So I go and I buy a filter. I install a filter, and sure enough, as soon as I install that filter, the pump lost its prime. When the pump lost its prime, I went and I checked it, and sure enough, the coupler came apart. The rubber coupler came back apart. So the reason it was pumping all the sand was because that rubber coupler was apart. It was sucking up sand in there, but for some reason it wasn't losing its prime till right when I put the filter on. So since then, going back and forth from Lowe's, I noticed that they sell these PVC couplers with rubber gaskets on the end and like a PVC thread. And I decided, well, you know what? That's probably a better solution than this rubber coupler. So I went out to Lowe's. I bought that, came back. I pulled the Soviet Union 2-foot piece back out. I put this coupler on that, real nice and tight on that side. And the 1.5-inch pipe's still there as a guide, so I put it over the 1.5-inch pipe, and I put the under all this sand and water. I'm able to get the thread started on the gasket on the other side, and I get it started and I get it tight. Now, the one thing that makes me nervous, and it makes me nervous to this day, is that feeling with my hands. Now, I'm doing this blind. I'm only feeling all this with my hands. I can still feel threads on the coupler, so I don't have it as tight as it could be. And I attempted to go, and after I put this coupler on and reprimed everything, it's worked flawless ever since. But like I said, I'm afraid that since the threads are exposed on that coupler, that it's not right. So I tried to go back and I got a plastic sheet that they use to like cover carpet and stuff, the thick stuff. And using a hose in the sand, I was able to shimmy this plastic sheet underneath the pipe and the coupler, with my hopes being that that plastic sheet would keep the sand out and I could back off the coupler and try to re-put it on to get the threads all the way in. But it was such a nightmare working in this sand under the water table that I realized, I was like, man, if I take that coupler off, who knows if I'm able to get it back on. So what I ended up doing was I ended up folding the plastic over top the coupler and I buried it back in the ground. And I'm just hoping that it doesn't come undone. I'm just hoping that it's right. But since I got that straightened out, I finally started making progress and started being in the business of getting these sprinklers working. So once I got that straightened out, I went and I undid all the valves, took the tops off all the valves, and cleaned them out for one final time and purged them out and put them back. And that final time that I purged them out, put them back. So with the coupler fixed and the filter on the system, the valves cycle perfect every single time. For a while there, I thought, man, this is a real stupid design. And these valves are faulty, brand new diaphragms, and they're still not cycling right. The reason they weren't cycling right was because the sand in the line was causing the valves not to seal. And when I was looking at, there's really only one alternative to 1.5-inch valves, which are way more expensive than the ones I got. But they're designed, looking at them, they're designed the same exact way. There's no alternative solutions. You got to use these diaphragm valves. And like I said, it was real frustrating that I couldn't get them to cycle right. But it turned out the problem the whole entire time was the sand was preventing the valves from cycling right. So like I said, hindsight's 2020. Like, you don't know how to troubleshoot this stuff. So since I got the valves cycling right, I decided that I was just going to blanket go through and replace all the heads. Now, the heads are, the zones are all crossed over each other. The way the head placement is really doesn't make any sense. And I still don't have it. I'm in the process of getting the kinks worked out of the system. When I get it done, I'm going to film a video, mainly for me, but I'm going to film a video documenting where all the heads are at, what zones on what head, what pressure you're supposed to get at a pump. So I have all this documented so I can troubleshoot better in the future. But not only are just the heads themselves, the previous homeowner mixed all these heads together. So what I decided to do was, when it comes down to it, there's only two types of heads. There's a pop-up head and a rotary head. So what I decided to do was do my research and find which is the best pop-up head, which has a 1/2-inch inlet, and which is the best rotary head, which has a 3/4 inlet, and just buy a whole bunch of those pop-up heads and rotary heads to try to standardize the system. So that's what I did, was I replaced all the rotary heads and I replaced most of the pop-up heads, but towards the end I started just cleaning out the old pop-up heads if I could get the old ones to work. But now I have it standardized that for now on in the future, I'm only going to use Hunter PGP pop-up heads, and I'm only going to use Rainbird 1800, I believe. No, sorry. Rainbird 1800 pop-up heads and Hunter PGP rotary heads. And just even knowing how to service a pop-up head and rotary head is like, I didn't know how to do that until I started watching these YouTube videos. And then once you know how to do it, everything works a lot smoother. Even replacing these heads, hindsight, like I said, hindsight's 2020. In hindsight, when I replace these heads, this is the process. First, you only replace one head at a time. Because what I was doing was I was replacing 4 heads at a time and then trying to flush out the line with 4 heads open. Turns out, and then I would have to go back and reflush out the heads. Turns out, if you're going to flush out a line, you got to have only one head open. So like on the rotary heads, I replace this head. This is the process. You replace one head. You pull you unthread the actual rotary head out, so it's only the outer housing. You run the system, that way to purge out all the line and all the gunk from that head. Shut it off. You put that rotary head back on, and then you can set your stops and whatnot. Same thing with the pop-up head. And also, I had these, they call them flush out tops, that helps the water flush out at a 90-degree angle instead of shooting up. Those flush out tops, them in themselves won't actually flush out all the gunk from the pop-up heads. So the pop-up head, I went and I bought these Rainbird pliers that help you clamp the pop-up head in the up position. You replace one pop-up head at a time. You take the nozzle off. You run the system, let the water purge through the pop-up head. Turn it off, put the nozzle back on, and then you can turn it on. So that's the process I learned working on sprinklers. If you're going to work on sprinklers and replace heads, only replace one head at a time and purge the line with the nozzle off every time you replace a head. So, like I said, I pretty much have it tackled. I still have some bits left to do. The one thing that's driving me crazy now is I have one head I need to find. And up until right when I was finishing up today, there was 2 heads I needed to find. But out of sheer luck, I was letting the system cycle itself. Out of sheer luck, I was cleaning out my wheelbarrow on the side of the house, and the zone switched. And when the zone switched, I heard a gurgling sound, and then it stopped. And that let me find this one head that I was lost. So now, to my knowledge, there's one more head that I had to find. And, oh yeah, by the way, this head that I found was on a. If you would have asked me, I would have guessed that this head was on zone 1 or 4 based off the other heads that are in this area. And it turns out this head is on zone 2, which doesn't make any sense. But like I said, in the future, I'll have a video showing where all the heads are located, and you'll see how kind of messed up all the heads are. So, to my knowledge, I have one head left I needed to find, but I'm sure there's more heads that are buried that I don't even know about. So what I'm going to do was I bought a $40 metal detector off of Amazon, a cheap one. I figured if it doesn't work, I can return it, prime. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to use that metal detector to find the head that I can't find, and then I'm gonna, if that works, if I find that head, I'm just gonna go walk around the yard with that metal detector, see if there's any more heads that I'm unaware of. But yeah, that's the whole fiasco with the sprinkler system. It's been a month and a half of working on it, and a lot of working on it and not getting anywhere. Finally, I'm getting somewhere, and part of me thinks I kind of, I want to. The reason I want to get it working is I want to heavily weed and feed my yard, and I want to try to get my yard looking better. But then part of me thinks that that's kind of a vain thing to have a good looking yard. But one thing that really drives me crazy is these weeds that have these. They're not sharp weeds, but they have these really sticky flowers, and you walk through the yard, they get on your shoe, and you had to pick them off your shoe one by one. So that's why I want to heavily weed and feed, and that's why I want to get this, you know, yard running right. But yeah, that's just me flapping about um, that sprinkler system, and uh, like I said, I'm just going to overlay video of me trying to work on it. It's probably real boring, but I just wanted to like talk about how frustrating it was. I don't know, just kind of vent. I guess this is a way to vent. I mean, it was super frustrating. It definitely tried my patience. And like I said, I'm not out of the water yet, so I don't want to claim victory yet, but I am seeing a lot more progress. And like I said, when I am out of the water and have everything ironed out, I'm going to make a video just documenting the whole system. So maybe you can, if you made it this long, maybe you can comment below about any problems you had with your own sprinkler system. Other than that, I have quite a bit of projects I want to do that I haven't been doing hardly any projects because this has been occupying a lot of my time. But I want to start focusing more on drone stuff again. Um, I'm going to build another Questor frame, and I need to get that CNC machine. Um, I need to square it up to get it running a lot better. So yeah, I thought I would just go and flap on about the sprinkler heads, and that's pretty much what I've been up to. That's the exciting life of Ranham. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.